happen across the table with a diversity of the leaders of the private sector.
Now, I introduced the program and I justified my inviting you here with a little bit of encouragement, I think. By saying you've made a number of statements on the no confidence motion. I wonder if we can turn our attention to those statements, and without quoting from them, but just the essence.
I mean, they fundamentally called upon the political parties to respect the Constitution and to respect the law. That is fundamentally what these statements have said, and to respect the way the law is applied. That's fundamentally what they say.
Now you made more than one statement. You made a statement. You made a statement before.
Having said that, the fact that the no confidence motion has become a controversial matter, the fact that it has become enmeshed in constitutional requirements makes it even more important that independent bodies like ourselves address it responsibly. And that's what we try to do. Some persons think that we are biased in favor of one political party or another. That comes with the territory as far as I'm concerned. When there is a political controversy, any independent commentary on it is going to be labeled by those who like what you say as being favorable to the correct side, and when they don't like what you say, it's biased in favor of the other side. But when we come to this whole issue of the no confidence motion, it really is, in my view, fairly straightforward.
No, but I was trying to get the sequence straight. You had, is it 2 statements?
Three.
We've had three.
3 statements.
3 statements.
And they were punctuated at some point by the court decision. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, the first one happened the day after the no confidence motion. I, as the chairman of the Governance and Security, was tasked by the chairman of the Private Sector Commission, Desmond Sears, to observe the vote in Parliament. And I did, and I reported back to him what I saw, and I reported back to him the response by the government, by the Prime Minister, and the graciousness and the high sense of responsibility that I was actually, I mean, obviously people were very sad that it happened the way it did because nobody really expected it. But I reported back to the chairman that I saw a high level of maturity in the Parliament that night, being displayed by the Prime Minister, who accepted the vote,
and by the public,
and by the leader of the opposition. So I reported that, and the next day the Private Sector Commission basically issued a statement.
Well, we issued a statement
yes.
because it became at that point in time a matter of controversy.
Not yet. Not yet. All we did the next day, because it wasn't until I think after the president left the country on Christmas Day that it started to change. But on the 21st and the 22nd,
we got to remember that the cameras were on the event.
Okay, I see what you mean.
The event itself manifested huge controversy.
Yes.
I see what you mean.
So it became a controversy from that point in time. I don't mean it became a dispute between the political parties.
Right.
But it became
controversial.
Of national concern.
Yes.
From the moment it happened, because it happened live, it happened in the view of the entire nation. The cameras were focused on it. Some very unpleasant things occurred at the time. So,
but still, what Gerry's saying, that's not gainsay what Gerry said.
No.
That the Prime Minister, in fact, made a very gracious
Yes.
and, as you said,
Not
mature
once,
statement.
twice. Not once, twice. Because
Well,
he
I
said it
don't know.
in the chamber.
I
then
wouldn't
after.
use the term gracious. I think what the Prime Minister did was he did his job. He respected the fact that the Speaker of the House had ruled it as valid.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
He was aware that the whole nation was paying attention. He was aware that there were significant crowds outside of the National Assembly with some significant biases on either side. And he quite responsibly and properly declared the government's recognition of the Speaker's ruling. That was what a Prime Minister, given the absence of the President of the country, had to do and had to do immediately. That responsibility, in my view, fell upon the government.
Yes.
It is the fact that all of that has changed has made matters significantly much worse.
So in terms of the sequence of the statements and the events,
The first
You would
statement
like to take that up?
basically, the
Yes.
first statement basically
Was respect.
outlined. Yes, yes.
yes.
Respect for the Speaker's ruling.
Yes.
And the first statement I think dealt with the fact that that we observed it. We thought it was done properly. We respect the Speaker's ruling, and we expected the constitutional triggers that was pulled that night for the provisions that it would have been respected. And that is basically what our statement
When you
said.
say constitutional triggers, could you
Well,
explain that?
when the no confidence motion was passed, Article 106.6 and 106.7 was triggered immediately.
Of the
106.6,
Constitution.
yes, and 106.6 said they call on the issue of the resignation of the ministers from cabinet and the president from cabinet. But the president remains the president, and the ministers remain the president, the ministers, as outlined in Article
But
106.7.
much more important than that, I am sure you were going on to say it anyway, it required that an election be held in 90 days.
And that was the constitutional provisions, and so we
Yes.
respected that, and everybody in Parliament seemed to have respected that, and even the next day, I think the president came out and respected that, and then I saw an entire cadre of ministers deployed on Christmas Eve day across Georgetown, implying exactly the same thing, that this thing happened and that the government was now going to go to the people to reaffirm their confidence, and they were going to use their record of all the things they've done, the tongues, the roads, the bridges, and the things that they've done.
Well, they were preparing in recognition of the fact that there was an election due to be held until such time as they reversed their position.
Yes.
Correct. So that was our statement, basically,
Yes.
the
And
first
then,
one.
okay, go on.
Look at you.
When did you issue your next statement? Then we heard talk about going to court.
Well, we issued the next statement when the government reversed its position. And again, its focus was recognize the Constitution, respect it, and don't depart from it. But by then, many things had begun to happen. And the most important of them all is the government pronouncing that it no longer recognized the validity of the no confidence motion.
Can they do that? Can a government do that? Recognize that on which the speaker has pronounced?
But what is important?
Well, I don't know whether it can, it did.
but,
Yes.
but
No,
what,
man, can it properly do
but
so?
what is important
You
is
have
that
to tell me again. I will tell you, you're the lawyer.
is that the speaker said on January 3rd they will meet again
Yes.
and they will discuss the consequence of
Yes.
the vote.
Good. Yes.
And then during that period, the speaker was then written to many times by many people asking him to review his decision.
Well,
And
I
at
think
the end of that decision is when our second statement came, because
the speaker was put on the spot by the government.
Mhm.
He was written to officially by the government, and he was asked to reconsider and reverse it.
And the speaker is himself a lawyer,
A PhD in
and he
law.
has a PhD in
Indeed, and a highly respected
yes.
lawyer. The speaker then went public.
Who is also, just for the record, who is also a nominee for the speakership of the government.
Oh yes, I mean the speaker is appointed by the government.
Government, that's correct.
So you could say he was the government man. I don't think that this particular speaker we have is anybody's man.
That's correct. That's correct.
But many speakers, I have to tell you, have been.
Yes.
I won't name them, but we've had a history of speakers who've not been that politically independent in their ruling.
Now, Kit, and you've been a major observer, slightly older than some of us here.
A lot older than
There is no speaker who has had to make as fundamental a decision on the existence of a government as Dr. Barton on that evening.
No, because it's never happened.
Yes, exactly.
It has never happened. I mean, this is the first motion of no confidence
Yes.
that has ever been filed in our history.
Well,
Well,
no,
it's been
one was filed
actually
before.
been-
the first one
no.
that was taken to the floor of the National Assembly.
Remember,
Not
they had-
voted on.
Right.
That's what I mean. Yes, yes.
I shouldn't have said filed, not
Yeah.
voted on.
Voted on. That's
But what I will say to you again, on January 3rd, I was actually, again, dispatched to observe the Speaker's ruling. And the Speaker was eloquent, and he was, I just sat there and I listened to him deliver his ruling. And I think he did it so well. And at the end of it, we figured that this was a done deal. That, if it had to change, that the Speaker would have changed it, and he didn't. And then the private sector issued a second statement then after
Yes, urging that the Speaker's ruling
Right.
now is respected.
Did the private sector get
Well-
concerned at that stage when there still appeared to be challenges coming?
Yes, I think we began to be concerned because the reversal of the government's position and it's the government's declaration of its disbelief in the validity of
Which constituted a rejection of the ruling and affirmation by the Speaker.
Correct.
Right. So you didn't have to be that clever to see that this was leading to possibilities of instability right away.
Yeah.
I mean, the business community never likes anything that is horrifically unstable. You can't do business in an unstable country.
And it actually comes down to jobs. It actually comes down to the sustenance of people jobs. But what is important, I believe, is that on the Speaker's ruling, at no point in time, I believe any one of us, whether as individual citizens or as private sector leaders, would ever deny the right of any citizen, including the government, of the right to appeal, the right to higher courts. But because the Speaker of the National Assembly ruled once, he was given a time and then he ruled again. It was kind of unbelievable to us that we were not believing the Speaker.
And then it went to the court.
Correct.
Well, the Speaker, in much of what he said, invited the court to pronounce on the validity of its ruling.
Which he need not have said, because that's a given.
But he did that in the context of the future.
Correct.
Yes, he said yes.
He didn't ask the court to say, "Am I correct?"
Yes.
He said, quite properly, I think, that it is such a major issue, and since it clearly had become one of controversy, it would be a good thing if the court ruled on how it be addressed going forward.
Yes. And how did you think the court, and when we say the court, we really mean a single judge of the court, the Honourable Chief Justice?
She is the High Court.
Yes.
The matter now was appealed by the governing party.
No, but what did she say? That's what we're trying to get to. What was the effect of her ruling?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I considerably admire the fact that she ruled so comprehensively and so quickly. She need not have done that. She delivered a ruling which must have caused her many sleepless nights.
Yes.
She did it in an extraordinarily fast time. But more important than that, she didn't treat it with anything but absolute care and concern. It was not an off-the-cuff ruling,
No.
which many Chief Justices have been known to make. She covered, and I say this as a layperson, every aspect of the law that she could possibly dream up and refer and research.
She did.
And she was not dealing with one case, she was dealing with three. I
That's
think.
correct.
3 cases.
That's correct.
All at once.
Yes.
You having bought one yourself.
Yes.
And she did it with remarkable aplomb. And she did it with remarkable dignity. And whether she was right or wrong, the nation owes her a huge debt.
Did she strike you as being right?
For me,
Yes.
absolutely. She did not only rule, but she gave justification. When she dealt with the issue of the 33 and 34, her ruling, she didn't only deal with it in law, she dealt with it in mathematics. And mathematics is science. Mathematics is not guesswork. I'm a science person, and every mathematician you speak to, I mean, it is the smallest child will answer that question for you, but the judge went into great detail in explaining her decision and justification.
I will answer you differently. I would not say that she was right. I would say that she gave a ruling that I expected her to give. Whether
Because it seemed logical from the language of the Constitution.
There was nothing in any of the protests and the challenges that I have personally seen, and I don't speak in the context of the private sector, that convinces me that the no confidence motion was not valid. But that's just my personal position.
Yeah, yeah.
So we get to this situation. So she reaffirmed the Speaker's his ruling and his affirmation. We get to this position now. There's a right to appeal, of course there is.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But there's something also called an abuse of the process. But now, the critical thing about the decision, does the decision stand? And you were talking, Kit, about elections in 90 days and the resignation of the cabinet.
I want to say this. I was going to say earlier on that it's a fairly simple matter, and you asked me to set that aside for the moment. Why I say it's simple is this. You have an opposition that is out of power, and its legitimate priority is to regain power. And that is their objective. You have a government or a party in government that's in power, and their legitimate priority, always both sides within the law, to try and stay in power.
Yes.
And that, in fact, is what's happening, and that is part of the problem. Because if either side seeks to pursue its objectives outside of the law, then the country is in trouble.
That's correct. That's correct.
And there is some things that I think in this discussion that I'd like to clarify. And I think need to be clarified. One is that the ruling of the Chief Justice, regardless of its correctness or otherwise, is the law at this time.
Currently, correct.
And remains so. And it remains so particularly because the government's lawyer sought to have a stay of the execution of that ruling, and it was rejected. It is wrong for any government spokesman, in my view, to try and convey a public position that nothing has changed, that it's business as usual, that the government remains in power regardless of the ruling, without some consequences of the condition of that government.
It no longer has a cabinet.
Coming to that,
Sure, sorry.
part of the ruling, we know, consistent with the Constitution, is the cabinet says so in black and white, is to resign. It doesn't mean that the whole of the cabinet have to rush in there and say, and put resignation letters in front of the president. It means that, in fact, there is no longer a cabinet in place.
Lawyers call it by operation of the law.
Right. It also means that the president, who is the head of the cabinet, no longer has a cabinet to be head of.
That's correct, yes.
So he's not head of the
And
cabinet.
that explains why he is mentioned in terms of the cabinet, including the president.
Right. So I think it is dangerous and it is wrong for any government spokesman to convey otherwise to the public. Now that could all change. Yes. They've said, we're appealing. But the fact of the appeal, until it is heard and ruled on, has changed nothing. And that is why the private sector went out of its way to make a statement trying to emphasize that fact. Much has changed. The government remains in office. The president remains in office. They both have a job to do. But there are certain restrictions upon that existence. The bigger problem, which I'm sure you're going to address, is the fact that there's a clock that's been started. It's a clock
From the 21st of December.
which says in 90 days elections have to be held. The conducting of those elections is dependent upon GECOM, the Guyana Elections Commission, to be prepared and ready.
But the obligation, as 1067 says, the government shall hold elections.
Yes, yes, indeed. So, unless something were to happen that says it doesn't have to hold elections in 90 days, the law requires it to do just that.
And Gerry, I was just doing some numbers. Of that 90 days Kit is talking about, which is restating the Constitution, 47 days have already passed. That's more than half.
That's why I brought up the issue of GECOM. And we addressed GECOM
On both times of our
in
statements.
both of our statements. We said that we expected GECOM to be prepared to hold elections as is required, correct me if I'm wrong, by the Constitution.
Yeah. Constitution is the supreme law. GECOM is itself a creation of the Constitution.
Yes.
As is the government.
I was going to say a creature of the Constitution.
That has a certain connotation.
Well, so there are two things, and Kit made the point. The government right to appeal is unquestionable. The government have the right to appeal. But while that appeal is pending, the constitutional provisions that was triggered continues. And there's only one way at this time, until a court might rule differently, that could delay that, and that is the Parliament with a 2/3 majority agreeing to delay the 90 days.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's the other aspect that we haven't talked about.
Yes, yeah.
That the only way that 90 days under the Constitution can be extended is if there's a 2/3 majority decision. in
Which
the
requires the
Parliament
opposition to
extend
support.
it, which obviously requires cooperation between the government and the opposition. If the opposition decides in its own wisdom or lack of it that they're not going to render a 2/3 majority, then it won't happen.
Now,
Then the consequence of that,
The consequences
it's
of
frightening.
that, well, it's very dangerous for the country because you would then have a constitutional requirement that an election be held for a government which has been challenged. And if that election is not held, then the legality of the government comes into question.
Yes. That's frightening because the Constitution doesn't contemplate an unconstitutional or an illegal government.
No, it only contemplates a legal one.
That's correct.
so for the opposition, GECOM will need to convince the opposition if the delay is as a result of GECOM administration being delinquent in their preparation to be always ready because of our constitution, GECOM should always be ready to conduct the election.
We are meeting tomorrow
Yes.
with the GECOM chairman and his officials. It is the way the private sector commission works. We've also sought meetings with all of the political parties concerned, and indeed we've sought a meeting with the president himself.
Correct.
Because we wish...
What's the response to those requests?
Well, let's take them one by one.
Yes, go on.
First of all, as I said, GECOM
GECOM.
has responded positively, and we're meeting with the chairman. And we will ask him to tell us in very simple terms, I think, are you ready to hold the election?
And if not, why?
And if not, why?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, when? I mean, those are the three questions we can ask.
Yes.
And find out what the facts are. But there is sufficient reason for public concern in that GECOM, first of all, has remained very silent on the matter. Secondly, the chairman himself has been ill and therefore not operational. Thirdly,
But there's nothing
The
that says
commissioner-
that without the chairman, GECOM...
no, but still, he is
is
the
crippled.
chairman. He is the chairman. And it would be better that he wasn't ill, and it would be better that he was in place. The fact is, he is ill or was ill and wasn't in place.
The point I was
And then-
making, that
then
he
I have a
he
third-
doesn't have to be there in order
No.
for
Yes,
the
I
decision
hear
to
you.
be
I
made.
understand that, but it'd be better if he was.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
The third point I want to make is that the Elections Commissioner has announced that GECOM cannot be ready to hold an election until July.
Is it the Elections Commission or the Chief Elections Officer?
Chief Elections
Chief
Officer.
Elections Officer,
Mhm.
Sorry,
Chief
yes.
Elections Officer has said that. He's gone public and said that. That has specifically dangerous consequences because the election list is said to be expire at the end of April. Whether that
But we had elections in November.
Yeah.
Well, you can logically suggest and argue that there should be no reason why they're not prepared, but I'm not going to get into that.
But Kit, I want to ask you this.
We want to know,
Mhm.
Yes.
we want to know, and we should hear truthfully, promptly, and honestly from the Elections Commission what the situation is.
This question is not intended to be prejudicial to that meeting you have. But as of today, GECOM has had 84 days notice of the no confidence motion
To make themselves
From-
ready.
to make itself ready. And in fact, GECOM must know the Constitution. It's a creature of the Constitution. It must know that it can be called upon under Article 1067 to hold elections in 90 days' time.
Yeah.
Well,
to what extent does that bear on you?
From the day the Chief Justice ruled the legitimacy of the no confidence motion, the validity of it, from that day, the 90 days clock started.
Yes. But I was saying,
you said you're talking
no,
about this.
not from the no, it's not from the Chief Justice's ruling.
No,
it's from the date
right,
of the
right,
vote, November
right,
21.
Right. It goes back to that point, that point in time. So GECOM should have had,
Which in fact is 47 days.
right.
Which is 47 days. So does that bear on you as you think?
GECOM has a constitutional responsibility, I want to say that, to be ready to hold the elections within the prescribed period that the Constitution requires.
Yes.
It is their constitutional obligation to be able to hold those elections once the President calls for the election. The President has a constitutional responsibility to call elections within those 90
Yes.
days. So both have constitutional
Yes.
But the president will still rely on GECOM's readiness because he will inquire from GECOM their state of readiness.
But Gerry,
to
it
set
is
the
not.
date.
It is not conditional. The provision of the Constitution is not conditional.
That is correct.
It's absolute.
No, but what I mean is whether the elections were going to be on the 10th of March or the 20th of March or the I mean, it would GECOM would still have to say we are ready for this date.
What we're really saying is there is no legal reason why GECOM should not be ready at any time.
That's
within
correct.
those 90
And on
days.
practical terms, today is 84 days, Gerry.
But coming back to the issue with the opposition and the two-thirds majority, so GECOM need to be able to convince the opposition that whatever their limitations are, whatever is preventing them from being ready, the opposition have to be able to accept that as legitimate to then agree to the two-thirds majority. And if they don't,
But the opposition would want to be assured that the government is not acting outside of its bounds. For example, no cabinet subcommittee can now operate because there's no cabinet. If the larger unit falls, the smaller unit falls. No, and this one should be particularly of concern to the private sector. There is no contract over $15 million that can now be awarded because under the Procurement Act, the cabinet has a specific function. So
The cabinet simply isn't functioning.
it doesn't exist.
Right.
So
But you
Mo-
see,
Mo-
the great danger, and is why I agreed to come on this program,
yes,
is the deliberate
it was conditional, he's saying.
is the deliberate position that I hear too many spokespersons for the government taking, that none of this matters until the appeals are heard.
Yeah, the president said, look,
And that is very dangerous. The president hasn't quite said that.
he is quoted as
But he-
saying there is a legal, I am president.
but he is president.
No.
The president
and
actually,
the government,
in my view,
But let me
because
hear-
there
let
is
me
an
hear-
appeal
Chris,
process.
in my
The
view,
appeal
I don't
process
believe
does.
the president has said anything that he can be pinned down as wrong. But it's impressions, and politics are all about
But he's
impressions.
president of the ministers who are making these statements.
Yes, he is. And he's, in fact,
And he ought to bear
he's president
responsibility.
of the office of the president
Yes.
that made the statement.
He's president of the country. And now,
So
my thing.
his ministers, one in particular, and his office have made erroneous statements, and he has not corrected them. And that's
Does he have a duty to correct them?
Of course he does. He is at the end of the day where the buck stops, as one famous American president once said.
Now, if we have this extension, and that's an if because it does require, would it be reasonable to expect that the government would accept certain conditions and it's not business as usual.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, the government is saying it's business as usual. It can do whatever any government does. The opposition is saying,
We know that it can't.
well, so I'm asking you,
Under the law.
under the law, I'm asking you whether it would be a reasonable proposition for the opposition party in government to insist, as a condition for that extension, to insist that the government recognizes its own limitation. It may not want to accept its lame duck, it may not want to accept its caretaker. That's true. But the fact is, it has limited capacity at this stage.
I believe this. I believe that if it turns out that the election must be held, within the 90 days, and there's no, let me put it differently. If it turns out that GECOM were to say to the nation and to the president, we need a bit more time for A, B, C, and D reasons, say a month or two, I think it would be reasonable then for the opposition to say, fine, we'll give it to you.
Without conditions?
I don't know that they need to set any conditions except that the law must be observed. and
That's
the election must be held.
no. Well, the condition is that the statements by ministers, oh, it's business as usual, and we will award contracts, as is happening. Cabinet has been meeting. That's a fact.
Well, that would be another matter, Chris. Surely it would be that after the elections are held, if perchance the opposition were to win them, they would be within their rights to reject anything that was decided illegally.
But it's not them. It's as much the private sector. Now you have people who are bidding for contracts. You have advertisements for contracts. Tenders being put out
Where
there.
the private sector is concerned, we want to see the law observed.
And I think that is the bottom line.
Which
want
includes
law
calling
and
a
order.
halt to these contracts.
That is the law, then it should be observed.
Should be observed. And then it brings us to March 21st.
Yes.
If the Parliament did not approve the extension,
Because now I should ask this. Sorry, Gerry, to interrupt you. Is there a schedule of meetings between the president and the opposition to resolve these unresolved issues?
Well, we don't know that. It would be,
And ought there not to be?
if we were sufficiently sophisticated politically, and if we cared sufficiently about the well-being and good order of our country, then there should be a schedule of meetings, and those two gentlemen should be meeting on a regular basis and coming to a decision which respects the Constitution and respects the law.
Do you get a sense of urgency from the government and the president on that the clock is in fact ticking?
It goes back to what I said at the very beginning. We have a party in power that wishes to remain in power, and they will exercise every means at their disposal. I was once a member of a cabinet. I know how it works. They
But
will
not one facing a a successful
Right,
no
but
confidence
still
motion.
it's a principle of being in office.
Yes.
It is the gravamen of being in politics. You're in politics to be in power. And if you're out of
Legitimately.
Yes.
Legitimately.
power, within the law, always within the law.
No, but my question was to Gerry. Does he, as chairman of this governance committee, do you see that urgency being demonstrated either by the president or his government?
I can't say that I have not seen it. I haven't seen it, or could I pronounce on it, because I do not know what is happening.
No,
behind.
whether
I
you
don't
see.
know. No,
I
I
asked
don't
you
know.
what you've seen.
I've
asked you what you've seen.
I can't pronounce on that, because, and I'm saying
No,
that
I'm asking
because.
what you've seen.
I'll tell you what I've seen.
Yes.
Go ahead.
What I've seen is deliberate attempts by the government and its spokespersons to give the impression that nothing matters until all of the appeals are heard,
Which is wrong.
which is completely wrong.
But I'm hearing both of you. But while there may be people speaking, you break the law not by speaking, you break the law by your actions. And I could not put my finger on an action on behalf of the government at this time.
Cabinet has said that it's met.
No, it hasn't.
Yes, it has.
But I don't know.
It has. They
When,
have.
when did
Well,
it? Since
I'm
Not since the ruling, but they have said they've met.
well,
They
we
have
haven't
said
seen
they've
that.
met.
I
They
have
said
not
they've
seen.
met,
So
yes.
what I'm saying, I have not seen.
You know, you get these statements after cabinet meetings. We've had that.
I have not seen action on behalf.
But-
I heard words that obviously is concerning us, but we have not seen any action.
Would you have liked to see, can a president say, look, yes, I accept, I appreciate that under Article 1066, there is no longer a cabinet, and therefore we will function on
That
a
would be to me a responsible thing for a president who, when
And he
he was
hasn't done
sworn in, swore to uphold the,
And he hasn't
the
done it.
Constitution. And to me, that is what we would all want. We would all want to see, and there's no question about that.
I think we covered that ground.
But
I mean,
you've actually said that in your statement, so
I did.
implicitly,
We
if
have.
not explicitly.
Yes, we've covered that ground.
Now, we've got just about 4.5 minutes, and maybe a little bit more. I think we started 2 minutes late. I am very exact about our time on this program. Where does this take us if by March 21 we
There's-
have no resolution?
There's absolutely no doubt at all, and cannot be any doubt, that if there is no extension of the 90-day time, and if no election is held within that time, then the government becomes illegal.
That's an extreme situation.
But that's a fact. And that is a situation that the business community will do everything it can to make sure it does not happen.
How does the Gerry, and you're chairman of the committee, the governance committee. How does the private sector commission, which stands for law and order, and of course, meaning respect for the government, how does it deal with a government that has become illegal after March 21?
You asked Gerry
You-
an
you-
impossible question.
because we have never had to do it.
No, that's not the
No,
reason
no,
why
we don't know. We don't know. We really do not
How
know.
would you want to deal with? No, you can't say you
At
don't
thi-
know.
No, at this point in time, we are not expecting that.
Kit
But-
has just said.
No. Kit is saying if it don't happen, but I am not expecting our government
All I've
or
s-
anybody to break the law.
All I've said is that if there's no election by the prescribed time,
Yes, and I've asked.
it's not extended.
We have to start looking ahead to pretend that we don't know now, and we have to see it actually
Well,
happen.
what are the
What
rea-
happens?
A better question to ask is what are the realities if that happens?
Well, that's the reality.
First of all, the country will be cut off from
No.
all international financing.
That's quite possible, and that's how it should be. No, but I was
And then the
asking.
government will not be able to function effectively.
Well,
It would become almost by rule of force.
A de facto government.
it's an illegal government. It's illegal. So no, my question
Well,
is.
it's not
we
a
got 2
government
minutes.
within the law.
Yes. So how do you deal with a government? And maybe you're not ready to answer that question.
Why don't you tell us?
No,
Chris?
it's not for me. I ask questions here. I don't provide.
But we will
answers.
have to turn. We'll have to turn to our legal people,
I'm
and
sure
we do
you
have
will.
a legal team that guide the private sector commission in our deliberations.
I think a bigger question is not how the private sector will function, how will the nation function.
Yeah.
It's new. It's uncharted waters for us. Personally, I'm expecting our politicians to obey the law
Now,
and to operate within the Constitution.
And we, as I've said before, will do everything within our limited power and within the force of our voices to see that it doesn't happen that way.
this is a moment. This is an occasion putting country above party and politics. Would you agree that that's where we are now?
Yes.
You know, I will. My last say with this: when I was in Parliament on the 21st and the vote happened, I saw the leader of the opposition got up and reached across the divide and said, "Let's work together." I saw a man who said, "What is before us we have to bring the benefit of what is before us to all of our people, and to do that we have to work together. And I'm hoping that our political leaders will work together, so that we could truly, every Guyanese could really reap the benefit of what is offshore.
I know we all have to be optimistic, but I'll ask you one final question. Are you seeing those signs that this is what is going to happen, as opposed to what is more than likely to happen?
I think is perhaps a little early to speculate on signs. Both sides are grandstanding, as all politicians do. Both sides are exercising their options, but both sides will have to come to their senses very, very quickly.
And what role does the Private Sector Commission have in bringing that?
I believe we bring a voice
about?
of reason to the table, and like Kit said, we have right now we have a message into the president. The civil society and the private sector want to meet. In fact, civil society have sent that in,
Which is bigger than the
which is
private
bigger than the private
Yes.
sector. This include the church and the labor and the bar association, all the others. So we are waiting on that. We are going to be meeting with the leader of the opposition. In the meantime, we are meeting with all of the international donor agencies as well, and and all of the diplomatic community. And we are talking. We are all talking and getting ourselves in gear to meet with the political leaders to urge everybody to obey and work within the confines of the Constitution.
15 seconds to close, Kit.
President Granger and Mr. Jagdeo have the nation's well-being within their hands and within their powers to ensure that the law ultimately is observed and we go forward as a functioning country.
Mr. Kit Nascimento, Captain Gerry Gouveia, members of the Private Sector Commission, and in fact on the Governance and Security Committee of the Private Sector Commission. Thank you so much for appearing on Plain Talk and for sharing your views and your optimism to the nation. And I hope that our politicians are listening. Operators and viewers, thank you, good night, and I'll see you next week.